Feinberg back here with you with the team over at FTN. We'll be here weekly talking golf. I'll be back here weekly talking golf with the cast of characters here at FTN Live on the YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7 as we introduce our show Draws and Fades. It'll be myself. Tonight I'm joined by Alex Blickle. I'll be joined most weeks by Alex and a rotating flock of the guys here over at FTN that I love being a part of the team at FTN. Thank you to the guys over at FTN. You might be wondering, this is different than what I've been doing over at FTN in the past. And to be perfectly honest, this is far more preferred for me. Had my own thing, made me realize, you know what? I just much prefer talking golf with somebody else on a weekly basis. And tonight, I am joined by my buddy, Alex Blickle, current professional golfer, majored in econ, statistician machine. He works hard here on the models at FTN. So he's the perfect guy to tell me essentially like how off base my perceptions are. So Alex, that is also your job, not also to give pertinent information, but to stop me in my tracks anytime I get off the reservation. Welcome. Happy to do this with you. Looking forward to a long season of PGA Tour golf that I don't really consider gets going until once we're in Hawaii. But hey, the hardcores, we're at it, and it's fall swing. So let's give her.
Yeah, I'm really excited both for this week and for the show. I'm very excited to wear two very distinct hats on this show. One, as you alluded to, kind of being the professional golfer talking through the merits or lack thereof of specific narratives, and also just being the statistician talking about my golf modeling and who it points to on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and let's just get right into it. You are sort of a wizard with the golf model, with the course fit model. We are here at Houston, an event that has just had, we've only played here one time. How difficult does that make? Does that make the key stats model, or we have to just take it with a supreme lack of like the sample size just leads to so many variables that even you aren't prepared to fully say you can quantify?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Typically, when we only have 1 year's worth of data, the model's basically useless. And the nice thing is, that shows up in the statistics. It would just be a statistically insignificant model. You can just toss it out and say, you know what, we got nothing to work with this week. Let's just move forward. But this time around, only 1 year's worth, there's still a pretty decently strong model. It's certainly not as strong as the models that we'll get in the heat of the season, like particularly the Florida swing is just one awesome, incredibly powerful model after another. And that's typically the part of the season that I've had the most success with as a result in DFS. But it's really nice, therefore, to have a model that just gives us anything when a lot of the industry is just kind of tossing their hands up in the air and saying we don't really know what to do with this course yet.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of us are. Last year it played so difficult. The cut line was, I believe, +3.
Yeah. But
at the same time, we were sold that it's literally a $35 muni. So what are they doing to the residents of Houston? Like, it was hard to quantify what exactly we were getting. And like a lot of golf bettors, even I'd say, or myself, even before models, became so prevalent and such a important tool to be able to rely on, I would say I hated going to the new courses because I like seeing which type of players win here, because you see 7-8 consecutive winners and six or seven of them sort of have that similar game type. You can sort of hone in on a group or even winning score, because there are certain players that you think, at least by my perception, that I can't trust in a birdie fest, but I want to be able to trust or believe I can trust when we are grinding things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you kind of talked about what was so difficult about this course and why it was surprising that it was such a difficult course. I think one interesting point there is typically the more difficult golf courses on tour really accentuate the importance of around the green play. And it was actually the opposite here last year. Around the green was very unpredictable. And so that's one of the things that we're sort of leaning into with the results of the course fit model this year. But also, I think it's noteworthy, the greens were really firm last year. They were fairly new greens and didn't really have time to settle in. So an extra year's worth there could actually make this place play a little bit easier than it did last year, more receptive greens. And again, the interesting thing that, that's another change that would just work further in the direction of around the green play being less significant than usual.
All makes perfect sense. Again, the model, it is arguably the best in the industry, What is going on over at FTN? Get in on the action. Use the promo code GOLF over at ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. Again, game-changing optimizer over at FTN. An ability, well, Alex, you're the man behind the model, so I guess I should let you sell it here for a moment.
So I think there are two models you're referring to there. The first are the course fit projections, and that's all me. That's just something I've been doing for a few years. And basically what we do there is, a lot of the industry loves to look at course history, and I'm very much anti-course history. I know my colleague.
We'll get along in that way.
At FTN, very much that way as well. And the argument is really simple, honestly. I've done the research outside of even just looking at course histories. Like when you are trying to model a player's upcoming season, you don't just want the data from the previous year. It also gets more powerful when you look at data from 2 years ago and even data from 3 years ago. Basically what that tells us is golf is such a variant sport that you need a really large sample size for the numbers to matter. And you just don't get that with course history. You're looking at such small samples of just a few rounds and only 4 each year. So by the time you actually have a decent sample of rounds at a course, it's over a period of time where like the player is not the same guy he was 6 and 7 years ago. So it's just totally unreliable. However, you can group all players together, look at everybody's course history based on their strokes gained profiles, who they are as a player, and come up with this course fit model. And that's what I've been able to do. And so basically it just tells you from a predictive standpoint, what type of players have success at specific courses, what skill sets are going to translate the most into success at a specific course. And then the second model you talked about is our optimizer at FTN. That one, unfortunately, I can't take the credit for because it is a fantastic optimizer. I've been so incredibly impressed with it. And I think the best way that I can put it is more so than any other optimizer I've used over the years, it's really efficient with your time. It's quick and easy and intuitive to use. And it gives you 150 generated lineups that honestly, like if you took the time to build 150 lineups by hand, you'd get a very, very similar collection of lineups as this optimizer gives you.
Magic. ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com. Use that promo code GOLF. Get in on the action all season long. And obviously that would give you full access to all the other sports and happenings over at FTN. All right, let's get into it. Houston, I sort of mentioned, we sort of went through it. We don't have a sample size and what sort of impact that can have on key stat modeling. And as I like to say, we go to a course that we've been at, for the last decade. You can look at past scores, you can look at past winners, and you can try to draw something from it. Looking at the leaderboard last year, is there anything like, just to the naked eye, there's a lot of magnificent tee to green players as a whole. But as someone that, talks about outright golf betting or, golf bets in general, I feel like it's such a lazy or cop-out way of talking about a player. Or, of course, it's great. Yeah, tee to green. Like, I'm looking for great tee to green players. There's very few weeks where I'm not just looking for guys that are great tee to green players and that are going to have 4 days full of 20-foot putts for birdie. And you hope some of them are 5-footers and those that they make. And you hope you make enough of the 20-footers to get you to Sunday. So I do think it's a totally lazy approach to do it, but it's a course we really don't know much about. And last year's leaderboard was a plethora of elite ball strikers, some of which struggle putting.
Yeah, and that's what this course fit model tells us. I think it's something like 29% of the weight goes to off the tee, something like 36% going to iron play, and then surprisingly, actually 30% went to putting, with under 5% going around the green play. And basically, what that tells us is, like you just said, it's a ball striker's course, and it does help to make putts, but putting is so variant that and so random. I would even say that even when putting pops as predictive at a course, it doesn't take a whole lot for bad putters to show up on the leaderboard, especially because so many of them are on tour as a bad putter because they are great ball strikers.
Yes, that would make perfect sense. The majority of guys, I mean, yeah, there's far more guys who are incredible tee to green players and sloppy putters than there is that very small group of bad tee to green players, but they can just make it happen from everywhere.
Yeah.
Your career is more likely to look like Bo Hostler's if you're not a very good tee to green player, I guess, right?
Right. And the other point there is, like, it's not just that it's harder to be good in that way, but it also gets to the stability of each type. So basically, ball strikers are more likely to stay good ball strikers than really good putters are likely to stay really good putters.
So we sort of gone to the surface there on the key stats for the week, and you mentioned it being, the ball strikers course. So who benefits, I guess, the most from around the green play being negligible on a week like this?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I wrote about this in my Hot Takes article, but Jason Kokrak is, I think, the prototype for the guy who is going to benefit from a course like this. Long term, his averages, he gains 0.57 strokes off the tee, 0.51 with his approach, almost a quarter of a stroke on the greens, and loses nearly a quarter of a stroke around the green. So if ever there was a guy who is going to love a place that basically rewards 3 out of the 4, where the one that doesn't really matter as much is around the green, it's Jason Kokrak. And there are other guys who are set up really well here, but I don't think there's anybody who is as uniquely well suited to this course, whereas on a generic course, he might not pop as much as Kokrak.
And I will throw it out there. That was, what a coincidence. The first bet I made this week was Jason Kokrak. And I'm not going to lie, Alex, as we sit here late on Wednesday, I was starting to have buyer's remorse on the bet. Like, that was a Monday morning instinct bet. Like the line, thought the course fit, didn't overthink it. He's comfortable in Texas. He is a guy who brings a level of recent win equity, and in many cases just disrespected by the lines maker. I even joked in content I did earlier this week. He's almost like a poor man's Harris English in some respect, like a player who's now playing at a much higher level than at times we mentally want to give him credit for. But when it's there, it's as good as anybody. I will say I had a bit of buyer's remorse. Now you've made me feel good. As we've gotten closer to the event, it's guys like Shane Lowry and Mark Leishman, who I feel like, I don't know, are in that identical betting range, who I think I maybe should have pivoted to. And if you have a thought on them, we can get to it in a moment. I will say, also pure coincidence, the first time we're doing a show together, I let you know I bet Adam Scott this week. And you inform me he is number 1 in your modeling?
Yeah, he's number 1 long-term in expected strokes gained. So when I phrase it that way, basically, like the course fit model uses, or just kind of plugs in the stats that a player has and spits out unexpected strokes gain projection. So when I say long-term expected strokes gain, what I'm talking about is that's the expected strokes gain projection that the model spits out when using his long-term strokes gain profile. And then the recent form expected strokes gained is what the model spits out when using his recent form strokes gain profile. And the recent form always uses the last 20 rounds. And yeah, Scott is number 1 long-term. He gains 0.69 with his irons. I believe that's the best in this field. No, actually it's second best to Emiliano Grillo, who's no longer in the field. So he is first. And then also, you wouldn't necessarily think about it with Adam Scott, because so much of his career he sort of battled some putting issues, but he's gaining over half a stroke per round long-term putting, and obviously has always been a pretty good driver of the golf ball. And especially in recent times, it's been his around the green play that has sort of held him back. I mean, he's in his last 20 rounds gaining about a quarter of a stroke off the tee, almost 1.25 with his irons. He's just been phenomenal with his approach play, still gaining half a stroke putting and losing nearly half a stroke around the green. So just like Kokrak, just every aspect of his game is well suited for this golf course.
Okay, and from an outright betting perspective, listen, I admit all the time, if you crush it in DFS, there's a much higher level of skill, in my opinion, than hitting an outright wager. And I'm lucky enough that the variance, I guess, has been on my side, or better to be luckier than good, that years go by, I'm able to hit my quota and people still want to hear me talk. But I'm aware, like, I'm most of the time getting lucky and picking an outright winner, picking a player to play well this week. That takes a level of skill. Picking a player to win is pure luck. Like, it is pure luck. There's 150 guys out there. There's 8 gazillion variables. The smartest guys I know, like the sharpest bettors, they're friends of mine, but they laugh at my outright bets. Not because I don't win them to keep this operation going, but they realize, I'm sure you see it, like, there's no edge in them. And even if they like a number, the amount of variables in between them and actually winning are too many that it discounts it, where they can just find edges in head-to-head matchups or props, far more profitable. I just hope to get lucky enough throughout season. That being said, I don't know why I went on that tangent, but I guess it's the first time we're talking, so I'll make that, just throw that part of my brain out there. Adam Scott, though, I have bet him to win this tournament. You've mentioned he's number 1 in your modeling. Is he the type of guy that can sort of win without playing much golf recently, too? Because that is what we are asking. And I would say I've seen him go over to like Australia at Christmas and play great and win. And I don't know how much he's playing, but he's a guy that doesn't play a ton to begin with. He's a guy that talks about, like, verbalizes it out loud, like how few events actually matter to him and to so many of the players. So there's that part of it. Like, should I be concerned about that? Or like, you would tell me that's irrelevant. The model points to it.
Yeah. So before I even answer that question, I'll just push back on what you said a little bit about you just being lucky with your bets. I mean, I've heard it in the way you kind of explain why you're betting certain guys. You're talking a lot about range of outcomes, even if you don't necessarily know it when you're saying it. But basically, like, when you're betting somebody, it's not so much that you're betting that he's going to play well. It's that if he plays well, he's going to have a good chance to contend.
Thank you. Yeah.
And, and so that's obviously a really important part for DFS too, because you're not just trying to pick guys who play well. You're trying to pick guys who, if they play well, they're going to give you the real payoff, because they're both high in the leaderboard and they're lower owned than some others around them. As for your actual question for Adam Scott, like, I would say the first important thing to realize is this is a guy who he doesn't play much at all anymore. And so every time he tees it up, he hasn't played much lately, right? He's basically always playing stale, if you will. And his numbers are still what his numbers are. He's used to playing in this way and playing well in it. So no, I wouldn't be concerned with it at all. I think, it's a much bigger concern if somebody has played a ton their whole career. Like, if suddenly Sungjae Im went 3 months before he played again, okay, maybe you should be a little bit worried about rust. But for somebody who is now very accustomed to only playing a handful of tournaments a year and continuously plays well in them, no, it's not an issue.
I like that answer very, very much. So I don't know, I'll riff through my betting card this week. I don't know, I went a little silly this week, Alex. I've gotten maybe a little cocky 3 straight weeks, hit Hideki, had a Reed second place, hit my Victor exotic. So I'm like in my little sweet spot, and I pretty much just peppered 25 to 50 to 1 range players that that I believe their ceiling, if they play well this week, will pop for me. Finau, Hatton, Scott, Reed, Kokrak. Those are the bets that I'm rolling with this week. Thought long and hard. Well, I shouldn't say. I thought long and hard about Neiman, and obviously Brooks Koepka had my attention. But as I've said a couple times this week, how wrong am I to be on a near total fade of Brooks this week?
I actually think it's totally fine. I mean, there's number one, like we talked backstage about how Koepka is definitely somebody who cares about majors and really big, highly competitive tournaments a hell of a lot more than he cares about others. I know in the past he's even talked about, it's not just his focus level, but it's also his preparation level. Like he just wouldn't practice for tournaments he didn't care as much about. But this also isn't necessarily like a narrative thing. I mean, the numbers, the model itself doesn't point to him. His long-term expected strokes gained is quite good, but his recent form hasn't been good. He's driven the ball well, but his iron play, he's lost strokes, and he's lost strokes on the green in his last 20 rounds. Around the green has actually been his second best area. So it's more than just a narrative here. It's also that the model doesn't really point to him.
I've also come up with my own theory that might not be reality, and the sample size isn't large enough, but it's something I'm willing to roll with. I have convinced myself that the Brooks Koepka at 30 to 35 to 1 is the ultimate dead zone Brooks. He won at Phoenix at like 50, 55, and then he contended at the PGA at the same. And if he's going well, he's near the top, and you want to back him if you feel he's confident in going into a big event or a major. But I don't think he's ever performed in this, in this Brooks trying to let me milk this Brooks money over 30 to 1. That's something I kind of said it a few weeks. I'm now maybe living the bit of it. I don't expect him to be 30 to 1 forever, because you're either going to see Brooks in form or maybe Brooks not in form where he can get pushed back. But I'm living on this theory that 30 to 1 Brooks is dead zone Brooks. It's dead zone Brooks.
I think part of my role on this show is going to be kind of laying a mathematical explanation over top of some of the things you say. And this one I think is actually fairly mathematical, which is when he's in that 30 range, it's almost always going to be when there are both good players in the field, but it's also not a huge event. And when he's lower than 30, like when he's in the 50s, if Brooks Koepka is too talented to ever be there. So anytime he's in the 50s, probabilistically speaking, like his range of outcomes is too inclusive of a week where he's going to contend for him to be there. And when he's better than 30, it means he's either the class of the field or it's a major, and we know he lives for him. So I can get behind that one.
Okay. And before we get off of the outright vibe and go into more of some DFS fades, or you could throw any outright suggestions you have at me this week, I have made my betting card. Let me back this up. Brooks is 30 to 1. My betting card this week is filled with lots of guys I feel like I've lost money at in like majors over the last year. And I said last week, and I said in some of the content I did this week, the books are like waving. They're like airport attendants waving you away from Taylor Gooch and Aaron Wise right now.
Absolutely.
They do not want us to bet him.
Yeah.
And I'm not smart enough to actually put that into play. I said it last week. They don't want, you put Taylor Gooch and Aaron Wise at the same number as the players that I am going to lose money on at majors, like Hattons, like Scotts, Brooks, Aaron Wise 2 points shorter than Finau, all these other guys. Like, what are your thoughts on that? To me, I'm just going to watch Aaron Wise win because I need peace of mind, and I would be so mad at myself. I may not get the right guy in this range, but if I don't bet, I'm just trying, like Hatton at 35 to 1 and he wins, I'll be so mad at myself. If I miss Aaron Wise at 30, I'll just be like, I shouldn't do it. That doesn't make sense. It just wasn't there. I'll have to be happy for him. But the books don't want us betting them. They do not want us betting them. They're setting a number like a football bet. Like they're making a spread so lopsided to say, you take anyone else. Don't take this side tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a reason not to bet them, just because they're very purposely betting them at odds that they probably know are too long to be a smart bet for a better. So in that sense, just listen to him. As for my bets, the first guy that I'm on, and he's somebody that weeks and weeks ago, like early in the FedEx Cup playoffs, I think even maybe a couple events before that, I talked about Sam Burns as a player who looked prime for a breakout. And the reason was long-term, he'd been a great driver of the golf ball and a great putter. And more recently, his iron play was phenomenal, and he was making even more putts. And so all he needed was a bounce back in his driver, and all of a sudden he was going to get more and more opportunities to take advantage of his hot iron play and hot putting. And he's done exactly that. He's been on an absolute tear. I just think, he's such an explosive player, and he's somebody who has very clearly leaned into the data on how advantageous extra distance can be. He's basically been hitting the ball further and further each event. He's just a player that I want to buy in every sense. And I feel like in DFS, he's a little bit out of my price range at his 20+% ownership as well. Like if he were either cheaper at 20% or was this expensive at 10%, I'd be all over him. That combination, I think, makes it very unlikely he's going to make it into my single entry lineup. So I want to at least bet him, get exposure to him that way. And then I think FanDuel just made a big giant mistake putting Cam Smith at 23-1. He's far less than that elsewhere, and he's somebody who's been playing fantastic golf. Wrote him up again in his last 20 rounds. He's gaining 2.29 strokes relative to the field, gaining 0.3 off the tee, 0.86 with his irons, 3/4 of a stroke with his putter, and about 4/10 around the green as well. He's just been a fantastic all-around player, and that iron and putting combination fits this golf course really well, and obviously gives a lot of upside for a player on any course, really. So I think 23-1 is just really disrespectful for him. And then again, with Eric Van Rooyen, he's somebody who both projects really well for this course. He's another guy who his only weakness is around the green play, especially of late. He's, in his last 20 rounds, gaining 0.3 off the tee, almost half a stroke with his irons and putting, and losing about 1/3 of a stroke around the green. So another guy just came. FanDuel made a big giant mistake. They posted him at 75. He's 60 or less everywhere else. You just don't get that type of difference at a specific book very often. So I hammered 75-1 on FanDuel.
Like all of those, I'm impressed with the Burns selection, or I should say, anytime the the double major in econ and stats is going to the favorite, I just gotta be like, oh man, like, am I missing something? Sam Burns, he's already won twice, what I will call, like, in the calendar year. A third win, he'd become a certified wagon, like a fire wagon. And to say, like, the first win puts him into even without winning, he had already jumped tiers for me, like, in tour, in terms of, like, an overall ranking, just how well he was in the season, early season, some big fields, big events. And then, he came back, found his game again, and turned it into victories and multiple victories. What a great season. 3, that would just be a new category. Like, I don't even know I'm prepared for how much he's risen, both, like, actually and in my perceptions. Wow. 3 would be quite something. And, well, some people might diminish the victory and being like, he's great now, he's the favorite. I would actually look at a win as the chalk, as a completely different type of stepping stone, and like something that would be significant to me. Well, any win, but winning as a chalk, it kind of carries its own significance. And I said to Joe Idoni at Tour Picks yesterday, Sam Burns is now at the point, Alex, where when I'm betting him, when I'm going to make a case of betting him at super strong fields against the very best in the world, I'm literally going to say, I don't care if he's up against a super elite on Sunday. He carries himself in those situations like players you have that utmost confidence in, say a Patrick Reed, or guys that that the player they're head to head against for the win might have more talent, but they're not wavering like an inch on that, and they believe that they got this thing. Like,
Well,
so from
remember
an
the
outright betting perspective, those are guys that, you know, I personally believe like Berger is one of those. I know people will fight me on that, but like that is something that is very important to me when I make outright bets is that sort of ability. Because don't get me wrong, there are a lot of guys I bet that I hope they're not up against a really good player on Sunday if they're lucky enough to get to the end. You know?
Well, remember the first time we really saw Sam Burns was at PGA National
I
years
was
ago.
there that day.
Sunday.
I was
Yeah,
there that
and,
day.
yeah, and
I
he
couldn't
went
believe
toe to
it.
toe with Tiger on one of the most difficult courses on a windy day, and just delivered. And like you said, I mean, he's got the psyche for this. He really does.
I was there. That was a couple. Yeah, that was the year JT won, beat List in the playoff. I was there that Saturday. They came to that. I think it's 16 or 17. Couldn't believe the scores that were coming. Like Burns. Yeah, no, that was. Yeah. I'll say it for the 15th time. I was there that day. Yeah. So there's that, and Cam Smith, sneaky, fantastic. I do agree. You could argue there is line value there with Cam, certainly, and I got not a bad word to say about EVR. And to your point, I can make the case that the EVR at 75 is like maybe the better bet than, say, the popular Seamus Power at 50, or even some of those other guys. They're pretty very similar. Their road to victory feels identical. One guy's getting 33% bigger number. That's who you roll with. Let's move it along here, Alex. DFS. For me this week, there are a couple guys because I'm playing some top heavy lineups. Just quickly, I'll tell you, my bottom of the barrel scraping for me is Fratelli. Sort of I'm just going off how well he consistently seems to play. That was maybe my prop list, but mixed up Poulter and Fratelli. But Poulter, List, Woodland, Fratelli, total Brooks Koepka, fade. That is sort of my road to DFS glory to supplement my Adam Scott, Cameron Smith, top heavy lineups.
Love it. Yeah, I'm actually taking sort of an opposite approach where I don't really want to go below like Ian Poulter at 7,300. I would be okay with. I do like Gary Woodland again. I like Johnny Vegas, Harold Varner, Eric Van Rooyen in that range. I don't really want to go below those guys. And so it's going to be harder for me to get access to a number of the studs. So my sweet spot is probably going to be like the Adam Scott, Jason Kokrak, even Mark Leishman. I like a whole lot. You talked about him earlier. Yeah. I like Lowry as well. I think Lanto is even a guy who projects pretty well across the board. And I think it's noteworthy that he sort of went through a fairly lengthy slump and is showing signs of coming out of it. And so that's always the type of guy that I always feel like models are going to underrate a little bit because they don't realize, hey, this guy has picked it up lately, and that's more in line with his long-term average, which is what we should expect more of from him. You know, I think it's always more significant when a guy who has been struggling has a few good events in a row than somebody who has just always been at that level, who has a few spike weeks in a row. You know, like with Lanto, we should expect him sort of to regress to his long-term average, and therefore I think he's a pretty solid play at low ownership. He's somebody who maybe if he were chalky, I'd likely avoid, but projected for 7% in single entries, so I do like him a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much my approach this week, particularly as a single entry predominantly player. I really am going to have a lot of trouble getting too many studs. I feel like I would definitely love to get to Cam Smith if I can, but it's not going to be the end of the world for me if I've got to start my lineup with Adam Scott, just so that I don't have to go too low in price.
What? Just how do I put this? A lot of talk has been made this week about the distance of this golf course. But you had mentioned to me that the distance this week, there might be a little too much overblown on this specific course, how it relates to distance, and maybe we shouldn't be ignoring, say, a Maverick McNeely or a guy, you know, we get so excited about at some shorter courses, but the second you see a number on a scorecard, you instantly just want to cross them off in certain respects. You would say to tread lightly in that regard this week.
Yeah, so basically, I think the industry makes a mistake where they see a high yardage total for a golf course, and they just say, oh, long golf course must favor the long hitters. And that's not necessarily the case. What determines whether or not distance is a huge advantage for guys is it's about lines off the tee. So number one, are there a lot of hazards that they're able to carry, whether it's fairway bunkers or a tree line on a dog leg where they can cut the corner, whatever that may be, where they effectively have a wider landing area because of the distance, or is it just that sometimes the added distance puts a scoring wedge in your hand as opposed to most of the field playing mid irons, and that's going to be more advantageous than when it's putting mid irons in your hand instead of long irons for most of the field. And so basically, like there's so much uncertainty and so many variables that are more important to know as it pertains to just how advantageous distance is at a course than the total distance of the golf course.
Yeah, because you could make the case, guys like Denny McCarthy, maybe from a super cheap perspective this week, and even Denny McCarthy, and even other putters, as I mentioned, or short course players like Mav McNeely. It does feel like there is a bias against them this week on this course. Also, I should say, I just want to, I guess, throw a very popular name, buzz golf name at you right now in Mito. And I'm not rostering Mito. I don't really want to call it a fade of Mito. But as a guy that just loves golf and recognizes what this kid's talent is, outside of players I am rostering or betting this week, he is a player I'm paying the most attention to, and cut me off if I'm wrong. This is probably the hardest PGA Tour course he has played so far. I guess the sample size is small, but I guess I'm using that to say I'm really curious. And I'm not saying this is something I'm looking for him to fail. I'm just really curious to see how he's going to perform when we go to some penal courses. Because I know he can dominate resort courses on the Corn Ferry, and we saw the stats early in the fall. A lot of those PGA fall events are, more so resort courses than we're going to get once we get to the thick of it. So any sort of thoughts on Mito? The stats are out of this world, but are they overrated, or we got to buy them?
So I actually would almost take the opposite stance. I feel like his strokes gain profile, where he's great off the tee, solid with his irons, and his big weakness seems to be putting. Typically, that works against guys on Birdie Fest golf courses. Birdie Fests are often sort of akin to putting contests, and so getting onto some harder golf courses might actually benefit him and sort of dampen the poor putting and the way that that's held him back. However, this course fit model does say that despite its difficulty, it did really reward putting a year ago. Again, it is just 1 year, and it's nowhere near as reliable as a lot of the course fit models that we'll see through the heat of the golf season. But it's something to keep in mind too, and it's enough that I think it's still smart to sort of keep it in mind with everything that we do in terms of our DFS approach this week.
Awesome. Full disclosure from me, this really shouldn't be a secret. Don't worry, we'll be into the new year soon. When these, I have no memory of last year, Alex, when these events collide with an NFL Sunday, I don't know. Unless I'm sitting in top position, it's just a blur. I'm just looking at it on my phone, not really paying attention. I am honestly just taking my losses and just making it like it's an even worse football Sunday. That's just the gambler DFS mentality of swing season golf. The bad golf weeks, they just get blurred in on the bottom line of how I did on football, which is probably normally losing golf bets. And here on this show, I'll throw it out, full disclosure. It's the first time Alex and I have ever really spoken. We'll get far more comfortable in going at it with each other back and forth all season long. I'm excited to do that. Before we get out of here, I'm going to just throw something NFL, throw Alex for a loop in a moment. Just any thought he has, because I know he's deep into that. And there's so many golf guys I speak to, Alex, that they have their chance to do content in golf, but we're all just football nuts, like at heart too, right? Like we're all just in some way just want to talk football, even though that's really not like the expertise. Not that anyone's an expertise. There's 16 games. They're capped perfectly. Before we do that, though, we did mention Adam Scott. We love Adam Scott. He's almost in a different class. To put him in this conversation would be totally unfair. I myself am expecting an amazing, before Adam Scott is done, I'm expecting an amazing like finish. I really am. When he's going to dedicate himself one more time to take on like these kids in the new era, and it's going to work out. It's almost going to be like a Westwood, but with wins in some regard. Like there's going to be such a great Adam Scott second wave that had he hit that 4-footer a couple months ago, we'd probably already be saying we're technically in because he won 8 weeks ago, but he didn't. So I can still say it's coming. But this is an event. We see some fun names that are important to all of us. Jason Day flirting with 100-1, pretty cheap on DraftKings, but going down even farther. Henrik Stenson, Francesco Molinari, just any, whether it be this week or sort of like some longer range season thoughts. Who, any sort of revival, like Westwood type return. I guess if I had to guess, I would pick Molinari. I think COVID and some things moved the family, winning the Open. Like I think there's going to be a reset there for him in a big way. But any thoughts on those guys or some of the other vets that are huge odds this week, but maybe some 2022 and beyond thoughts?
I'm kind of going to cheat with my answer and say, rather than trying to pick someone specific, I'll make the case that whoever does it, they're going to take the Phil Mickelson type and Bryson DeChambeau type of route, where they just kind of go all in on saying, you know what, yeah, I'm getting up in age, but I can still dedicate myself, gain 20 yards, and make myself relevant again in that way. Because I think one of the weirder things that we see with aging golfers is that putting really goes. And I don't know if it's an eyesight thing or what, but like that's very much supported by all the data. And yet we are seeing guys like Phil Mickelson shows that you can get longer and you can gain an advantage that way. And so I think there are going to be guys like Adam Scott is the perfect example. He's sort of relied on precision for so much of his career. If he got a little bit less mechanical in his golf swing and a little bit more athletic and gained 15 to 20 yards, that could be enormous for him. And especially because it would let him take advantage of his fantastic iron play that he's still got going on more than more than he has the opportunity to do so now. And so I think, it's a little bit of a cheat in the answer, but I think that's the path that we're going to have to see for guys to make a revival. And I guess like one other way I can get more specific with that answer is I would guess that it's not Henrik Stenson, because that really hasn't been his MO throughout his career. He was always favoring the 3-wood even in his prime. And I think like it would be really interesting to kind of go back through his prime. And if he knew then what we know now about just how impactful and advantageous extra distance is, would he still lean on the 3-wood as much as he did? Or would he go all out and maybe even take like a full year? He could have said in his prime, you know what, I might suck the rest of this year, not compete in any majors, but I am going to get to a point where I'm comfortable with driver. And just it'd be interesting to see how that changes career.
Yeah, I would say he had such a top to back down to the bottom. Once he sort of got back to the top, he's probably afraid to change anything again based on what happened to him the first time he sort of hit the peak in golf. And just thoughts on Day. Not even so much for this week. Unlike Scott, I don't see him as a guy that's going to like just show up and contend. I feel like a old lawnmower. We got to kind of just rev that thing a little bit. But there was a period last year where he was striking the shit out of the ball. Like you'd be watching on the weekend and it was nonstop, like incredible iron play to 10 feet and totally abandoned by his putter to the point where he didn't even survive like an hour contending on the weeks he played well. He was just like abandoned quickly. And I know it's a baby steps thing, but thoughts on maybe him, or the case that, he just had a third kid. We might see him from the outside as an underachiever in majors and overall trophies, but he just could totally be a mate, like thrilled and not give a shit. And I don't know what he's up to. So that's just me playing armchair psychologist on a dedication level. I have no idea, but I'd love to see it.
It was so weird to see just how incredibly hot he got with his irons, because throughout his career, he drove the crap out of the ball. He putted really well, and he had a phenomenal game. And irons were always what held him back. And then all of a sudden, he was like contending week after week because of his irons. And if he had just,
I wouldn't even say contending, but you like saw him playing great, and he couldn't hit any putt, so he was like not allowing himself to even. Yeah, he should have contended. There were a couple of events last year. There were a couple events, at least one, where I said, like, whoever won the event is lucky Jason Day didn't win by 5 strokes. Like, that's how well it felt. There were a couple events, and then I think we started to trust him again, and he disappeared. But it was there for like a small window last year.
Yeah, it really was. And actually, I almost felt like that was going to be a little bit there to stay, because it seemed like the source of it was he was trying to shorten his golf swing, whether it was to protect his back or not. It almost seemed like he played better and hit the ball better with his irons in weeks where his back was really bothering him. And I recall him talking about like feeling like he was rotating better and shortening his follow through and compacting his swing in a way that I had actually like just done myself in trying to make my iron swing a little bit more like Morikawa's. And so, yeah, I sort of had really, really high hopes for him, and it's just kind of gone away again. He's back in his last 20 rounds to gaining off the tee, around the green, and putting, and losing strokes with his irons, sort of basically in line with his long-term averages. So I really don't know what to think about him. I worry that maybe his back is always going to be there, and certainly at long periods of time throughout his career, his issue has been not being able to practice the way he'd like to because his back has been such an issue. So maybe for him, it's as simple as, will he ever get enough time where his back is fully healthy and he's able to just commit himself the way that he would like to?
There it is. I told you I'd let you like freelance on the NFL here, Alex, but I'm going to pigeonhole you because we're up against it, and there's a game tomorrow night. So just any quick thoughts on Dolphins, Ravens? Ravens off 5 full quarters. We saw the Colts just a week ago off 5 full quarters coming on Monday and cover. Would they have covered without Mike White? I saw my guy WalterFootball.com. Teams that play in overtime the week before a Thursday nighter, even with the Colts win 2 weeks ago or last week, are 4-24 since Thursday night football. Any thoughts, anything pointing to you, any on any level for Dolphins, Ravens tomorrow? I lean Ravens.
Stat. Like if ever there was I typically hate those types of stats just because like there's not necessarily anything to them. That one at least has a very foundational sort of thesis behind it that, yeah, if they played in overtime and have such a quick turnaround, they might be extra tired and come out flat, whatever. But I still just feel like, man, how could Baltimore possibly not just wipe the floor with them? They're so much better in every regard. I
sort of simply put it, I have way more confidence that Baltimore will create something to get me the cover than Miami will find a way to take a 14-point game and backdoor it. Like, I'm more confident Baltimore, with how horrible that offensive line is in Miami, will create the turnover, which gets me the cover, than that this pathetic Miami team doing something to go get the cover, say like Chicago did, despite everything working against them. And we'll find our vibe. We'll find the 10 minutes at the end of these suckers on Wednesday to do some football going forward. Alex, that was fun. Had a good time doing it. Guys, head over to FDN. Use that promo code GOLF, FDNdaily.com, FDNbets.com. We'll be here weekly. This is the first time we did this show. We'll get more comfortable. We'll find our niche and how we're going to lay it out going forward. But I'm really looking forward to doing this weekly with Alex. He brings a perspective that certainly I don't have, but one that is incredibly important. And we're going to work it out all year long, rotating with the boys at FTN, bring them in here all the time. So that was fun doing it tonight with Alex. I look forward to doing it again next week and all golf season long.
Absolutely.
There it is. We are out. Thank you to FTNdaily.com, FTN Bets. We are FTN. We could rewatch us if you're just catching the end here live over at the FTN YouTube or on my Twitter feed. It's up. It's out. Don't forget, go check out the optimizer over at FTN. It is something special in the golf space. Use that promo code GOLF. I am Geoff Feinberg for Alex Blickle. We'll see you next week, guys.